The first thing that you are asked to do in a room of strangers is to introduce yourself. It's to say your name and it's say what you do and what you want to do in the future and say something that makes you legible and creditable in their eyes. And you do it automatically. It's kind of like a subconscious response to silence. And you don't notice what you're actually surrendering to these people when you do that. You compress your entire life into a single sentence. You flatten something contradictory, unfinished, and constantly shifting into something that fits comfortably into someone else's head, into society's developmentation of you. It's early, like this comes early. You learn this kind of thought process early in the fact that you introduce yourself everywhere you go, through forms, through roll calls, through bios, through profiles, through applications, through resumes. You learn that to exist socially, you have to be able to summarize yourself. And once you learn that, once you identify with that fact, you start doing it when nobody even asks you to. You narrate yourself internally and you decide who you are and who you're supposed to be before anyone else even has to. You decide your entire life before you've experienced any of it. The violence from this concept is not physical. The violence from this is conceptual. It is psychological. It is that quiet demand that you must be reducible. When you introduce yourself to people, you do not say the truth. Like, to be honest, you drag the truth as much as you can. You want to tell them that maybe you just got promoted from this to that, and now you tell them, I just got a huge job at this company, etc., etc. You tell them a version that works. You lead with the thing that sounds stable to them. It sounds acceptable and defensible to you, and you don't say how many selves you've actually been. You don't tell them how unsure you are most days, or how often you don't even recognize yourself in the mirror. You give them a clean outline and you keep the mess hidden. All you do is give them that outside version of yourself. After enough repetition of this, the outline starts feeling real. The outline starts becoming the reality. You begin living as the introduction. You correct yourself when you drift too far from it. You feel shame when that inner life of yours doesn't match up with the sentence that you've been giving out to everyone, because now everyone identifies you as that, so you identify yourself as that as well. You start trimming off parts of yourself that don't fit neatly into that sentence. Maybe you do some unique sport like fucking crocheting. What? Maybe you do something random, right? But you don't want to tell people you do that random thing. So you start to cut it out of your life slowly and slowly so that you don't need to fit it into that sentence. And it's not because anybody actually told you to get rid of it, but it's simply because the inconsistency starts to feel dangerous once you've been named as a person. The world prefers you to act this way as well. It's set up for you to act this way, set up for you to be predictable and explainable and easy to place in and out of different positions in a job. People relax once they know how to categorize you in their brain. Once you're placed in their mind, interactions become so much more efficient. They don't need to work you out. They just need to identify you as this and respond with this because they have those prerequisites set up in their head. However, that efficiency has its own cost. You are no longer encountered with people. Instead, what you are is referenced. Over time, you internalize that gaze between you and them. You start asking whether your thoughts align with who you are and whether your desire makes sense for someone like you, someone who fits neatly into that sentence. Whether that feeling is or isn't appropriate for your actual role in your life. You start to become a curator of your own personality and you edit everything in advance to avoid any sort of confusion, to avoid any sort of friction between you and that other person. And it's primarily to avoid that discomfort of you being unreadable. However, unreadable, in my opinion, is where life actually happens. It's where life kicks off. Unreadability is what makes life so fun, the unpredictable, the unexplainable nature of everything. Before you were taught to introduce yourself, you were incoherent in the best way possible. You changed your entire life daily. You contradicted yourself over and over without apologizing to yourself. You didn't feel pressure to resolve that inner conflict into something presentable to everyone else, because to you it made sense. You simply existed without needing to be summarized. You did not need to be condensed into a sentence. And that kind of existence is so hard to recover once you've learned that language of labels and once you've learned the language of summarizing. Because labels do not just describe. Instead, labels discipline. Once you say, this is who I am, I'm certain that this is who I am, you feel so obligated to perform continuity even when that growth demands rupture, and even when that honesty requires you to contradict, even when the most alive version of yourself would look unrecognizable to the people who only know your introduction. So you hesitate within life. You feel that friction when you're about to change, when you're about to shift something. And it's not because that change is wrong, but instead because that change threatens the coherence of your sentence. It threatens the story that you've presented to everyone else, and it threatens the way that you're held in other people's minds. The real loss is not that others misunderstand you now. Instead, what it is that you start misunderstanding yourself. You forget that your identity is not a statement. Your identity is a process. It's ongoing. It goes on forever. It's not something that you have to announce or something that other people have to validate, but instead it's just something that keeps happening whether or not you acknowledge it. The most violent thing that society did was to convince you that you owe everyone an explanation of who you are, and that you must arrive pre-packaged to every conversation, and that ambiguity is a flaw. I don't know if I said that word right, whatever. That being unfinished is something to be embarrassed about. Once you accept that premise, once you accept that identity of yourself, you spend your entire life trying to live up to a description instead of listening to what's actually unfolding inside of you. You live life as if you're that outline instead of the thing that's within the outline. You don't need to stop introducing yourself. That's not what I'm trying to say here. Instead, what I'm trying to say here is stop believing the introduction. The whole point is to just stop identifying with that one sentence introduction, with that condensation. That is not the right word. You have to remember that it is not a confession. It is convenience. It's not a truth. Instead, it's just a shortcut. You are so much larger than that sentence that you use to explain yourself as. You always have been. And the moment that you loosen your grip on being understandable, something subtle starts to change within your life. You give yourself that permission to change without any sort of apology, without any sort of validation. And it gives you the opportunity to be inconsistent and to surprise people and be unexpected. It gives you the opportunity to disappoint the expectations that were never actually yours to carry. In that space, in that disappointment, in that illusion, where you stop trying to be so legible, where you stop trying to be some simple sentence, you do not disappear. Instead, what happens is you become real again.